from Ashley. And yes. Hey there, George.
Morning.
Did you get the drafted minutes I sent you? Okay,
Yes,
all right.
I read them a long time ago. I'll
Yeah.
have to, and honestly, I forgot about them. I should have read them yesterday. I read AJ's
Yep.
history, and
Summary.
I forgot to go back and read your notes. Let me do that now.
Okay,
So we
sure.
can
Yep, and I'll put him
vote on
in.
them. Thank you for reminding me. I should have
I-
remembered.
Forgot to put it on the agenda.
Did you talk to Becky this week?
Yeah,
Good. We can get an update about her. She told you about her conversation with Andy?
no, I didn't. She was saying he's the driver of the Doug Slaughter memo. Hey, AJ.
Good morning.
Morning, AJ.
We were gonna
Morning, George.
look over the minutes and that I sent out. I don't know if you had them.
Let's see.
George was just reviewing them in his mind. I
Uh,
sent
s- So these are minutes from,
from our other meeting. Actually, I can email them again to you right now if you want.
yeah, that'd be great, because I think I missed that.
And it's right here. Oops, sorry. Send. Or I can read them, doesn't matter.
Well, it's a lot to read. We could
Yeah,
be
I
here
just
a
got
while.
Yeah, all right, I have them now.
Okay.
Looks good to me.
How about you, George? Any amendments?
No, they look good to me. I'm in the last section right now.
Oh, wait.
That's one. Yeah, they look good to me too. Pretty thorough. Thank you.
Yep,
Yeah, we have to leave a paper trail.
yeah.
Okay, good. So those are approved. And let's see. Given the memo that we got from Becky from Doug Slaughter, I feel like we're in a timely mode here. If we can put together our information, we can pass it along. Whether it has any influence, I don't know. That's not sort of the whole point. And my goal is to get together what pieces we want to bring to our Tuesday meeting to share with those people. I can imagine to some people, the meeting on Tuesday will be advancing a negotiation strategy. But what I would like to do is have the information we have as part of figuring out what to do next.
So Susie, can I ask you, so I was just mentioning to you before AJ came on
Yeah.
that I talked to Becky when I was putting together the percentages for you.
Yep.
And she mentioned that Andy called her. And what Andy told her he was willing to do, he said, first of all, Amherst was willing to go to 55%.
Mhm.
And secondly, he would like another working group to meet
Mhm.
after town meetings during the summer to talk about the future.
Yeah.
We all saw his email where he wants to go to 50-50. And I know we talked about it actually now that I think. So I just wanted you both to be aware that that's where Amherst stands now. And then, of course, we all saw Becky's email again about Doug Sauter.
Yeah.
Can you guys clarify something for me? So you made reference to a memo from Doug Slaughter. The only thing I noticed was just Becky's email just explaining that she had some communication with Doug Slaughter. Did he write something that I somehow missed?
No, not that we got, but
Okay,
her
got it.
email just says, I had an email from Doug.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
And then the conversation she's had with Andy adds up to this. And so I try to have lunch with Becky once a week, just to
Yeah.
keep up, and to give her a place to talk. And she saw what we were doing as the information that would help sort out the future. I didn't know there was a working group planned or thought of. So, you know, whether if this is information the working group looks at, fine. I also think that it has that what we're writing up or thinking of has value to our town, because when we go to town meeting, if the FinCom has decided to accept this year's 55-45, and we can say, we are studying it, we believe this is a good thing to accept, and try to thwart a throw it all over the edge kind of attitude that we've had happen once before.
Right.
And we have enough. If I feel like the big piece of town meeting is, does this FinCom look like they're thinking about it and make a reasonable path forward? And this is what I feel we'll achieve, even if it doesn't become part of this year's regional assessment agreement. It just lays down where we are.
And there'll be future conversations about this. So we'll just be able to append it. We really have a good basis here, showing that not only we worked on it, but we'll, you know, the evolution of how we get to wherever we ultimately do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not surprised by Andy's offer, because that's always seemed within the guidance that they were working from the beginning of whatever it was within the 1%.
1.5, I think.
Oh, what was it?
Yeah.
1.5? Yeah.
Yeah, 1.5. But right, but the increase that they said they're willing to to go up.
And it was obviously within Leverett's guidance too, because they're actually going to experience a small decrease, right? Isn't that with the 55%, their assessments can actually decrease by some small amount?
I believe it was. Yep, it was. One, depending on which, at 55, it would decrease by 1.4.
Yeah.
Basically, well, actually, interesting. Yeah, $20,000. Yep, 1.4. Yep.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what I like about Amherst going to 55, and that is the gap from 55. I'm just looking at the PDF from the 4 town meetings. The gap from 55 to 100,000 is 726 minus 647. I mean, it's less than $100,000. So if they go with 55%, they are so close to the 100% that I just think next year's negotiations are not going to be that, unless things change dramatically, which could. I think them going to 55 is really good jump. The majority of the
45 to 55 is a significant jump, but it's not, after that, it's not too far from 100. That's not what you said. It couldn't be.
Well, so the 45 to 45 year to year for them is a $226,000 jump. But once they get to the, so staying at the same method year to year is a 240,000 jump. Let's just call it 240, 230. But then to move to 55 for the current year is an additional 17,000 for them. Yeah. So now the increments are small. The fact that they even stick with the 45 is pretty big because of the jump being so great. But then the increments beyond that are not great. So to me, going to 55 is a real win.
Yeah. I think there's going to be another dynamic next year in next year's negotiations, which is that it's going to be very hard for them to continue this track of making substantial cuts in each year. I mean, I think there's, if I don't know if either of you guys follow the regional or watch the regional school committee meetings, but I mean, they're like, each of these, their meetings are beginning with, this like half an hour period of public comment where there's just, email after email after email, concerned about this trend of, making substantial cuts to services, over the, multiple years. And I think, this is obviously a unique year. And so I think they're able to justify it. But, I don't think they can continue to do that without facing, really a significant uproar from the community. And so I think next year's, even if they were to move to 55, for FY22 and stayed at 55 for FY23, they're going to experience a significant increase. Yeah. I think we probably all will. And so there is going to be a further, if they then also continue to kind of march towards 100% modified statutory, that will be that much more of an increase. So I think there's going to be sort of like multiple dynamics going on next year.
That's a good point. I think that's very true. They've been compounding the cuts year after year. They just compound and compound. You just can't take any more. I don't see how you can get much more out of this.
So first of all, do you know if the town council's saying, oh, maybe we need a $2 million cut? Did that fade away? Are we really still sticking with the $1 million cut in the proposed budget?
Well, talking to Becky, Andy didn't say anything about asking for more cuts in the school budget. He said at this point, he's willing to go with the 55. The assumption, based on what Becky said, for me was that it was going to be this 1 million cut that was presented at our last board town meeting.
Yeah, and that was the budget that was reviewed in the last budget hearing where Mike Morris walked through kind of in much more detail than he did for us at the Four Towns meeting on kind of where those $1 million of cuts are going to be made. I've watched, I think, if not all, most of the committee meetings after that budget hearing, because obviously I'm very interested in the return to schools, issue that's happening, and they have not presented a new budget, at least in any of those meetings.
So just a reminder that in the four-town meeting package, there was a page that showed the breakdown of $1 million.
Yeah. And so another question that came up to me is, where in a small town like Shutesbury, we only have one grade, one room per grade, and you start getting smaller size classes, it's not, it takes a lot to change the staffing around reduced enrollment. In Amherst, how much he did attribute, sort of generally or vaguely, that some of the budget reductions are due to dropping enrollment, less kids to serve.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's obvious at the elementary school level, which also has multiple classrooms for each grade level, but there's some factor of dropping enrollment that means a reduction of $1 million may not be as service related as it is. It's not solely service related. So I feel Amherst's response to the idea of 100% statutory means they're going to slice the hell out of the budget, which was that conversation back in like FY18. I don't know if that's really, if that's the only tool in their toolbox. And if some of it has to do with reduced enrollment. And I don't know if those things can be separated or, teased apart, but that's another factor.
So I guess the one thing I would say about that, Susie, is that I think it's a kind of combination. I think there are some reductions, a few of the kind of proposed FTE reductions were in core academic subject areas and were explained as kind of due to declining enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
But then there were, I think, a significant number of other positions that were of the sort of category of cut where it's like, we're not going to be able to offer this kind of program anymore. So, and I think it was dance and art and PE and, not that they weren't going to have any of that, but that they were losing, whole staff positions.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I want to say in total, there was like, there was a 15 FTE reduction, but that, I think it was in terms of notices, it amounted to 3 or 4 people that were going to be laid off.
Yeah, because a lot of these were half
Vacancies,
positions, right?
Yeah, half positions, vacancies that weren't going to be filled, and
Yep. One job they've been trying to fill and they can't. A couple vacancies that they're not going to. There's at least 5 vacancies I see here that they're not refilling. Yeah, it came out to 15.9, like you said, and FTEs are split up. There's only 1, 2. There's a few here that look like they might be full-time positions. It is hard to say because of the decreasing enrollment to what extent this is decreasing enrollment and to what extent it's just cutting budgets, and clearly it's a mix of the two.
So what I can see is what I was hoping we would do is clarify our path forward so we're not negotiating this every friggin' year. And but if the 55-45 is offered and taken, can we be done? Can we be done with it? And then only push back on our own townspeople who are threatening the override if it isn't 100%? Or do we need to come, or do we need to come to a philosophical basis that's in that statement of principles, and then establish something like, okay, 50% minimum contribution, 50% enrollment, and then let that be the done. So that it's not negotiated based on money each year. It's a philosophical, and it reminds me of AJ bringing it up at the beginning. We can focus on the word equity. We can,
Right.
if it's equitable for everybody, then we're done with sort of pestering it.
Yeah,
Well-
I think that's my instinct, Susie. I don't know that I'm always, able to reflect that segment of our community that's pretty angry and kind of worked up about this. But yeah, I mean, I think I came away, from the developments of over the last, month or two, feeling like this 100% modified statutory or anything short of that is unacceptable. To me, that doesn't seem like a kind of a realistic sort of position for us, and it has less to do with the numbers. Like I think George is absolutely right to point out that for Amherst, the sort of incremental increases in their assessment amounts as they jump from 45 to 55 to 75 to 100 are actually much smaller than they tend to kind of talk about in these four-town meetings or describe in these four-town meetings. But there is this kind of philosophical objection that I think at least two of the other towns have to this idea that anything other than 100% modified statutory is fundamentally unfair. Like I understand why we argue that position, and I share it, but the fact of the matter is that at least two other towns don't view it the same way, right? And they have a different argument about what's fair and equitable. And look, having spent significant amount of time kind of work going through these, reviewing these minutes, it's clear that that's a fundamental difference that has existed for I think as long as these negotiations have been happening. So and they're just not like, there's not going to be a moment in this process where all of a sudden Leverett and Amherst come to these meetings and say, well, we've actually thought about this and we agree that the most equitable approach is, that's just not gonna.
Leverett will agree when it benefits them.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, that's why I want to try to move it into something that is just set, like 50-50. And I actually think 50-50 also helps. It may help ameliorate some of the downside of 100% statutory, which at some point in our history was not so great. So, it just sounds, and 50-50 is something that sounds like four towns could see as fair. And then it would be up to us to present it to our town to get the naysayers, even if they want to bring it to a vote, have enough people say, yeah, 50-50 sounds fair. And George, in your experience, do you think 50-50 has some benefit in terms of balancing the effect of statutory versus 100% enrollment? I mean, 50-50 is yet another set of numbers. 100% or 50-50? I don't want to pick it randomly.
Well, politically, it's right. Well, yeah. What can we say from a technical or analysis point of view that supports 50-50 being a good method? I think your point that you just made about we don't always benefit from 100%. It would be great if we could somehow sell the message to people that we have to think long-term. All of this is long-term thinking in terms of coming up with a method that the towns can accept, and that a method that will survive the different winds that will be blowing in the next 10 years. And, sometimes it'll benefit us, sometimes it won't. We're going to have issues with affordability. We may have another pandemic for all we know. And so what's the right method? That's what we want people to know that we're trying to get to. And then in terms of, and the statutory is not always going to benefit us. Everything is cyclical. And there is a chance that this cycle is going to turn. We're seeing higher volumes, higher enrollments in our kindergarten, in our preschool. We're seeing more houses turnover and more families moving into our town. And there's a good chance that in 5 to 10 years, the mix of factors that cause the 5-year rolling average to be better for us may be back in play. And a 50-50 method puts us all at the midpoint where, we have two methods that everybody's fighting for, the statutory versus the 5-year rolling. And Andy referred to them, and I've always referred to them as being extreme because they're polar opposites of each other. One town benefits greatly from one town benefits greatly from the other. If we were at the midpoint, those gaps between the benefit or the extra cost that a town has become smaller, in many years are palatable because we're all closer to that midpoint. So to me, that's a real benefit. And politically, it's a compromise position. So it's sellable to a general audience. And it really does have that impact of making nobody pays the full freight of being on the wrong side of the formula.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it easier to sell in our towns at annual town meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, we can say it's fair. I think Shutesbury has every right to point out to everyone that additional funds come into this region because of our financial need. And we should be benefiting more from that. And 50-50 method, if we print the numbers, is probably reasonable. We do get a reasonable amount of it. And what do we mean by 50-50 method? Because if we go to a straight 50-50 method, right now we're just over $300,000 difference between the 5-year rolling average and the statutory method. If we went to 50% statutory, 50% 5-year rolling, we're about 150, 160,000 paying extra than we would under the statutory. Can we sell that to the town? Will people in this town accept that if that continues year over year? That may be a hard sell. We talked here February 20th, when the three of us met, about a method where we know that the statutory method is 60% ability to pay. If we could make it so that we were getting 40 or 50% of the ability to pay into the overall formula, which would be something more like not a 50-50 statutory 5-year rolling average, but more like a 60 or 70 statutory and 5-year rolling average. We're going to have to come up with a good argument for that. But ultimately, Andy says he wants to meet us halfway. Maybe he's open to that. I mean, to me, as far as the conversation about two towns not supporting going to a 100% statutory method, Leverett's going to do whatever Amherst says. Amherst is carrying the whole load here on the direction. So I'm not really too concerned about Leverett. They're going to pound their chest like they always do. They're going to complain. They're the anti-Shutesbury. They're still mad about regionalization. We'll never get over it. And so we just have to focus on Amherst and what we can sell, what we can get Amherst to go along with. And that's Andy. Andy is controlling everything. So that's how I would answer the question, though, as to why would a 50-50 or a hybrid method really work? Because it is a midpoint. It's compromise for everybody. And those extreme differences that towns are stuck with from going to one method or another is mitigated.
And again, language is going to matter. It's not actually 50 statutory, 50 enrollment. It's getting the statutory part of the minimum contribution 50 and enrollment 50. Is that right? So, and then
either. Yeah.
And so that, I think you said that's like 80 somewhere.
I've got it here, Susie. I got that spreadsheet open, as a matter of fact. Give me 1 second.
Looks like it's somewhere around 85, right?
Yes. Yep. It's 87 to be exact.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
to me, that's not a difficult sell for our town. It's a difficult sell for
Amherst.
For Amherst. Yeah.
Yes.
And then again, we're talking about whatever we do, we would phase it in. And maybe in this point, if we come to this proposal of saying that this formula uses 50% minimum contribution, 50% enrollment, which is actually the language I think is important here. And we would like to get there, and we will take X number of years to do it. The other
and remember,
thing is,
we're already on that path.
Yeah.
we've already been moving towards it. So it wouldn't be more than
Well,
2 years, I would think.
But we haven't had an endpoint that's been very agreed upon, and this is trying to make the endpoint
Yeah.
agreed upon. So there are numbers that change in those graphs. So what I'm still trying to get to is 50% minimum contribution and 50% enrollment. And however that graph changes because of 5-year rolling average or whatever, it just seems the simplest, straightest language. But then I wanted to know, was S10 this agreement? And why didn't it sail?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by F10? Oh,
S10,
S10,
Abrams,
yes.
or Abrahams, I can't even remember what.
Yeah, no, it's Mark Abrams. Yeah, because there was not consensus among the towns. Amherst ultimately didn't like it. I personally wasn't a fan of it. I liked it because the numbers were looking good for us. They were close to where we were trying to be. But, they were relying on a metric. What was it? Medium average income in the towns, and it was relying on a metric that was somewhat suspect, not really, the statutory method uses numbers that the state has from a database. They're completely, the integrity is there in the numbers because they come from a independent database. And the other one I wasn't so sure about, but it looked good for us, but ultimately Amherst didn't like it and
So,
it failed.
but would it have been close to the idea we're talking about, we're just discussing right now, where it was 50% minimum contribution and 50% enrollment?
Well, it was calculated differently. So,
Yeah,
it was just a different formula. And honestly, I'm a little rusty. I'd have to go back and look at it.
So
But
this is what I'm just reading from the notes here. So it was, I think the assessment was calculated by taking each town's minimum contribution, the sort of full minimum contribution, and then whatever the excess was that was required to fund the budget came from the 5-year rolling average enrollment and and each town's median aggregate income.
Okay.
yeah, that's the number I didn't like, the median aggregate income.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like if we could say we're looking to get to 50% minimum contribution, 50% enrollment as our assessment formula, it is more straight lines than S10, and it sounds more balanced of the options people are working towards. And it may take still some more time for Amherst to get there. And to me, if we say this is the stuff that could go over on the Amherst Town Council a little bit more clearly, because it's just like saying there's these two factors. We agreed in principle that there are factors, and this is a balance of those two factors.
Yeah. I think the alternative, Susie, which is not that far from that, would be to think of it in these terms, that, we're essentially at, the 45, about to potentially move to 55% modified statutory, right? And Shutesbury's initial position was that we eventually need to end up at 100% modified statutory, and that the sort of roughly midpoint compromise there is that the 75% modified statutory becomes our ultimate end point, and that represents, even though it's not truly 50-50 in the way you've been talking about, Susie, in terms of the components that go into the formula, it does represent roughly a midpoint between where we are now and where Shutesbury has advocated as its end goal. And so if we took the position that we are willing to compromise if it means a permanent long-term agreement, we would be willing to commit to 75%, and it represents, and we're not saying we have to do that this year. We can do the 55 this year, yeah, and then step to 75, either
Well,
next
remember-
year or in 2 years. Yeah.
Remember, agreeing to the 55 would also mean a working group for the region. So there would
Yeah.
be a lot more of this conversation going on,
Yeah.
and the opportunity for us to, move towards that position.
And I do think it really is the finance committee, along with the select board. If we clarify to ourselves what we're trying to do, then we have something to present to town meeting, and we can fend off other solutions that are more extreme. I mean, so when Melody joined the committee and listened for her short time on, she said, well, why wouldn't you just go for it? So
Right.
the idea that there's a regional agreement in this, that there's 4 towns and we need to have 4 towns agree, that's what we're also working towards. We can represent that. We don't have to represent sort of the, what we want is what we want. So I'm hoping that, yeah, I could agree. I mean, 75-25 is still referencing something that is sort of invented. Not that, yeah. So I agree. I think we can come to 75-25. That means it's 45.
43.
Minimum contribution would be 43.
Yeah,
And-
43.3 preliminary FY22 numbers.
And what would the enrollment component be?
56.1
56. Yeah.
to be exact.
And, sort of, I actually would still like to get away from latching onto percentages that have been the long fight all along.
Yeah.
And just sort of go to say, oh, let's just say 50% minimum contribution, 50% enrollment. And
Right.
I don't care what those percentages work out in terms of those old agreements. It just
Yeah.
is. But
Yeah.
I understand why getting there might,
Whatever formula you propose, the first thing the towns do is run to the calculators.
Mhm.
And the calculators will help them decide whether they agree with you or not. And that's why we always have this fight, because there's going to be a town that is not going to benefit from it, or it's going, it's going to be very difficult for them, or they'll tell you it's going to be difficult.
Mhm.
So, we're trying to come up with a common sense, logical analysis here that leads us to the best possible method that stands up over time, and in a political environment, that's just a hard thing to do.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
So, we do. And as far as I agree with 75%, I think that would be wonderful if we could make that the new regional agreement and have the towns put a moratorium on using anything but that for 3 years. Put that right in the agreement, fiscal 22, 3, 4, or 23, 24, 25. This is the method, and we're not even going to discuss alternatives regardless. And then that would be great. I think we have people on our own finance committee that are going to be opposed to anything less than the 100% method. So we need
We're
to.
a minority.
So what are we going to be able to do? And maybe, maybe that's just the way it is, and they're going to state their position and stake it out and make their arguments, and that's fine, and we have a debate on a town floor. But, what can we tell people to get them to see some benefit in 75%? And for me, the number one thing is, I wish there was a way to show, and I don't have a crystal ball, that maybe the 100% is not always going to be the best method for
Right.
us. And that is something I wish I could sell.
Right.
But, the history since 2010 suggests otherwise. And so it's a tough argument. And I can't explain the factors that could switch us back.
The rebuttal was, but the state adjusted that formula and made it better. And one part of a statutory agreement is that the state does get to change the formula. And I do believe their intention might be to make it better, but it doesn't always work that way. And then
Can't accommodate every district, and your changes are not going to be beneficial for every district.
Right. And a third factor that's been thrown into this mix is, but we're nearly at $25 per thousand, and that. But I feel like that is not a good thing to balance on the back of our regional agreement each time that comes. We, as the finance committee, we're going to need to come up with some answers for how to change that are not just about the regional formula.
But Susie, even on that score, even if we were to land at 75%, it helps an enormous amount with that specific issue, right? I mean, that if we had 75% right now for FY22, we'd be, you know, we'd be saving almost 6% on our, you know, on our assessment. I mean, so
$100,000.
yeah, so you know, I think the $25 argument, I think, is most relevant to any push that any of the other towns make,
Yes.
that we should be going backwards towards the regional agreement method. I mean, that's where that argument, I think, becomes really important for us to articulate. But if we're arguing between, well, 75% statutory or 80, whatever it was, 87%, if that's what the 50-50 work, you know, translates to. I mean, in both of those scenarios, we're making an important step towards avoiding that problem, right?
And I think that's a really big selling point. You said it with the other towns. I mean, we don't necessarily have to use that with our town because, you know, Bob's like, well, you know, let's forget about the tax rate and pushing up taxes. We want to decrease what we're taxing. But for the other towns, when they say, why aren't we at the 5-year rolling average? The first thing we can say is, if we were at the 5-year rolling average, we wouldn't be able to absorb the assessment. We would be at $25. The towns need to understand that. Andy understands that. Andy understands that very well. I know he does because he and I have talked about it, and he's told me it's a concern of his. So I don't want to play that card against him too heavily, but I know that's in the back of his mind. He knows that we need to come up with a compromise method, and the 5-year rolling average is not an option.
Yeah.
That's why I was frustrated at that meeting.
Yeah.
That there were people in Amherst talking about it. It's like, why are you talking about this? And it turns out he didn't tell them. He didn't educate them. That's kind of upsetting to me that he didn't, but he's got a lot going on.
I have another issue though. When I look at the benefit or the progress we made by moving up the assessment percentage, 99,000 was the savings in the regional budget assessment, and we had some new growth and something. All of that money disappeared. I'm concerned that any savings does not need to go into reducing the taxes if we have other real needs to take care of. So,
which we've identified, right? We've been talking about it we're talking about our capital these long-term capital issues that we've been deferring and have to get addressed.
Yes, and I really want to get those written down on paper so that when we go to town meeting, right now, the discussion around the solar project is how that money will reduce our taxes. And it's like, wait a minute, we cannot keep sucking up all this money to make everybody's tax bills less. That's not going to maintain the town. And so somewhat the 25 per thousand, it's a real thing and we need to deal with it, but it's part of a lot of issues. It's not just the regional assessment issue.
Right. I do think that, you know, there are a set of arguments that do work with most of our town. Maybe they don't work with the, you know, that sort of most kind of politicized segment of our community that's that's really, you know, 100% statutory or nothing. But from what I've observed, here's what does work is, you know, we are at and it would work for 75%, I believe. It represents a huge transformation over where we were, you know, at the beginning of this march towards statutory. I mean, it's like, you know, it's 3/4 of the way there. Yeah, so it is significantly better for the, you know, individual taxpayers in Shutesbury. And it represents a compromise that is critical for the healthy functioning of our regional school district, which we are a part of. That's the vast majority of our community members view it as it's very important that we support our school system, we support our district, that Shutesbury is, that we are in partnership with 3 other towns to manage that district, that it benefits our community significantly for those who have children in the district and for those who don't, and that this is a compromise around, you know, what works reasonably well for the taxpayer in our town, and what represents kind of a healthy level of support of our district, that is not going to penalize the district, is not going to harm the level of education, it's not going to harm the level of services that are provided. And those are like those arguments, I think in total are enough to eventually convince a significant majority of our town to support, you know, something like a 75% compromise, or better yet, the 50, what you've been describing as 50-50. But I think I think there's, you know, it's not going to, it's not going to please 100% of the town. It's going to, I think it's going to be sufficient for most of, and it's not going to be, I don't even think it would be like that close of most people will get it, I think.
Yeah, and you know, ultimately the schools will come out and support it, and you know,
Yeah.
the parents show up, and we have a lot of people there. You know, a lot of the people who are now on fixed incomes and retired, they had kids go through schools. I had kids go through schools, and you know, to me, it's the level of spending per student that we have now. The level of education isn't what it was. The level of programs that were available to my kids 10 years ago, it's not the same, and that's not fair, and that's something the finance committee has to take into account. And I do think a lot of people will understand it because they did have kids in school.
Mhm.
You're going to get some people who are always going to be extreme, and it's why would we spend a dime more than we have to?
Yeah.
You're never going to, but I do agree with you. I think we would definitely be able to, we're articulating a very strong position here and a reasonable position, and people will identify with it and I think support it. You know, I always say everybody's responsible for educating the kids because our society as a whole benefits tremendously from it. It's why we're the great nation we are. But I'll tell you, neither of you were at the special town meeting, and I was really angry. It was one of the worst meetings I've ever attended. I was shocked at how many people showed up, and they weren't happy that we were putting $220,000 worth of cash towards decreasing their tax bill. They wanted another 200, whatever that amount was.
Yeah.
And 2 members of our committee fought hard in their support. And there was 50 people, over 50 people that were okay with taking another 260, whatever it was, 56,000, I think was the number,
Right.
in cash and applying it to the tax rate.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read the email we got from Jim yesterday, the release from the DOR about taxes. It's fascinating reading. I would definitely tell you to read it.
Yeah.
Shutesbury was the #1 town for a percentage decrease in their tax rate this year. And it's because we put the 220,000, where our name is mentioned in the article, you'll see it.
Oh, Jesus.
And it's because we put 220. There were people in our town, that wasn't enough. They
Right.
wanted to double it. And then
Yeah.
at our FinCom meeting last week, people are arguing, you know, look how much the tax is going to go up next year. Well, yeah, of course it is, because we used all that cash and you wanted to use more. Jim and
Yeah.
Bob wanted to use more. That makes no sense. Financially, it's suicide.
I feel like, let's see, where was I? Oh, I was at a funeral. And so I think it blindsided us how much, because at the FinCom meeting, Jim and Bob said, oh yeah, we're going to return it to free cash. And then they went to the special town meeting and fought against it. And there is more organization for people who want their tax bills to go down. But I think it means it behooves us to keep organized. And at annual town meeting, the annual town meeting, it got slapped down. All of that stuff got slapped down. And so so when it's a special town meeting, we need to understand what's going to happen, and we got to get out there. I feel like the argument wasn't made coherently enough. And so I think that's important, that the main body of the FinCom has a coherent presentation that gives the townspeople a sense of stability. We're still going to be fighting some of this, but at this point, the whole thing about where that new alleged revenue could come from for solar, it's going down the same pipe. Reduce our taxes, reduce our taxes. And when you end up with a town that has, the people are not paying for the services, it's coming from, a single industry or whatever, it is a bad sign. It's like people need to want to pay for the services that keep us a town. And
That's our job is to fund a budget that allows this town to operate. We need to be independent of all these arguments and these distractions and deflections, and just what is the right amount? What's the right budget? Certainly we all have a level of empathy. Nobody wants somebody to suffer. We hate hearing about kids getting their breakfasts and their lunches at the school, and that's the only way they can get a decent meal. None of us wants that. But we do need to operate the town. And in the long run, if you make cuts, and they're going to come back to bite you in the long run, and you're going to end up paying the unforeseen costs.
But also, George, I feel like I'm kind of somewhat of a broken record on this, but this strategy of sort of helping the town's most vulnerable citizens through reductions in our tax rate still ultimately ends up benefiting kind of the most affluent,
it doesn't have the impact
in our town.
Yeah, no question. I agree with you 100%. I'm not saying we should decrease. If I sounded like I said we should decrease.
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. No, absolutely not. I get frustrated because I feel like what, in a lot of these discussions, it's viewed as the only way we can help our most vulnerable.
Right.
And often, I almost hesitate to say this, but I feel like it is true that many of the people that sort of advocate for this, slash the tax rate as much as we can, are people who actually are not the most, are the vulnerable and struggling members of our town, right? I mean, so that's why, from my position has always been that these services that we're funding are often most critical. Really, they benefit every member of the town, but in some cases, they actually end up benefiting our most vulnerable, citizens even more.
That argument doesn't present services as a benefit. Oh, really? That's what the hell are we doing then?
Well, you have a lot of people in those big houses that are paying well above the median in this town that live on the Gold Coast. They live down in neighborhoods. They're basically living in Amherst, work in Amherst, do everything in Amherst. They cross the line to go home, and then they go straight back to Amherst. They don't use any of our services. I mean, they're the first people to say no to the library, for instance. Yeah. And I understand it. I'm not knocking them. That's just the way of the world. To your point, AJ, I think it's 100% true. And I've thought about this, and I got to think about it more. When we talk about $100,000 decrease in the budget, and we equate it to a change in the tax rate, how do we articulate to people that the guy who has a house that's worth $200,000 is going to save $30, and the guy who has a house that's worth $500,000 is going to save $90, and so that guy in that smaller house who's worried, is going to realize that he's not really benefiting to the extent, and then they need to understand that, and people need to see how it's going to affect them personally. Everything we do is, because it's really the only way we can, is averages. The average single family home is going to save, but the reality is our median versus mean, the median where the 50% of the houses are paying less and 50% more. That number is different. In fact, that article I referred to refers to that. And the state is thinking of changing the way they rank towns and look at the median, not the mean. anyways, yeah, there's got to be a way to articulate that. It's not really our job to articulate that, by the way.
Right.
Although we have taken on the role, I have certainly, in my years in the finance committee, always tried to make sure that people were educated on how the tax rate works, and being able to expand that knowledge so that people really could grasp this piece and notice that everybody who's standing up on the floor yelling about taxes has houses that are more than double the
Right.
average in town.
Yeah.
But that's a little
I mean,
mean-spirited. I mean, I'm not going after them, but clearly that is the motivation for some.
Yeah.
So I think that what we have come to think about is that the history and the compromise with 4 towns to make an agreement looks like 75-25 could be our goal. And I like the idea that George suggested that would be like a 3-year done with that goal. And then we see how things are working out for everyone. And that if we are going to come to this meeting on Tuesday and present that, we have the history, we have the agreement in principle, and I guess 75-25 is a familiar framework. So rather than going to 50-50, we can say the 75-25 is approximately 50% minimum contribution, 50% enrollment. And then the other piece is the timeline. And I thought maybe, George, if you saw anything that got captured that you wanted to edit, you should do that. But I think having it, I mean, nobody's going to read it from beginning to end at that meeting. But it says that, it first of all says that there was no agreement to go to 100%. So that is one of 4 towns agitating and for something that they think is in their best interest. And we can present that we think that is not totally clearly in our best interest because it's based on a formula that hasn't always served us, and that 50-50 sounds like, or 75-25 sounds like something we could get all 4 towns to agree. And I also would like to put in our arguments that we want to stop spending all this time, because guess what? We're going to spend time at the next friggin' meeting. And so we want to have a path forward we can represent that stops this spending of time. You know, you look at all those minutes from the select board meeting, holy shit.
Yeah.
It's just tons.
Tell me about it.
On that point, George, so would it actually be possible for us to, you referenced actually having a new regional agreement that codified whatever this compromise is that, I'm just mechanically, would that be a potential outcome where if we ultimately agree, if towns ultimately agree on getting to a compromise of say 75-25, could we actually produce a new regional agreement so that we're not actually voting on an alternative assessment each year?
I don't know enough to know the answer to that
Okay.
question, legally and what it takes and all that's involved. But we do know one thing: the current regional agreement is never going to happen. It's never going to be agreed upon. We haven't done it for the last 10 years. So why wouldn't we? So I'm sure it can be done. I just don't know how, and I don't know how heavy of a lift that would really be. But to me, there's no point in the current regional agreement. All it does is create fires. It creates this argument. Yeah. And so it serves no purpose.
Right.
So I think we can. I just don't know how. So I don't want to tell you 100%, AJ. Yeah, we just get together and sign the document. It may be more involved than that. It might be like amending the Constitution for all I know, in terms of level of lift.
Right.
But I just want to comment on 2 things, Susie. I don't know if we want to say right now that we think 75-25 is the way to go. I think probably what we want to say is we want to move farther along, like we've always been saying, towards the 100%, but we are not convinced 100% that we need to be at 100%. And that 70, somewhere between 55 and 100% might be better, and just articulate why we think that's a better position. And I only say that because we know that we're likely to go to 55 right now and have a regional group working during the summer. So, we don't necessarily want to stick the flag at any particular, draw the line in the sand at any particular point. Just know that we are still expecting more. We just don't know how much.
I guess that doesn't address the four-townness, but the way Doug Slaughter's running this, it's not a four-town decision. So that,
Yeah.
and then it's a pretty vague thing to be putting up at town meeting. And I guess we could still thwart 100%, throw this whole thing over vote. But it's not as sort of founded or.
But at town meeting, we have two things we can tell them. One, we have been progressing. Again, we progress because we go from 45 to 55, and there's a regional working group that's going to be analyzing all of this again. And we just feel like we're getting closer to the end game, and we're hopeful, we're anticipating that this regional working group will be productive, and there will be an outcome.
We could reference the principal's statement because we're not just hammering away at this. We're trying to reach an equitable four-town agreement. I think we need to keep saying that, otherwise people are acting sort of like prima donnas. This is our game. It's not our game. It is not just our game.
We're part of a community, and we have to think about the long-term viability of providing the level of education that the Amherst Regional School System has been known to do. I mean, we're very fortunate to be a part of the school system. A lot of people agree with that. Some won't, and we're not going to make everybody happy, and we never do. I mean, that's the other thing I wanted to say, though. Different topic is I did read, AJ, I did read through what you documented. I did have some, I had.
Please, yeah.
I think maybe 2 or 3 major things worth talking about when we're ready, Susie. But
how about you go ahead and put in some notes to edit? Because one of the things I saw is, did Shutesbury draft the principal's statement, or was that, I thought it was drafted by the central office and we offered edits. We said, no, we can't accept this. And actually Leverett did too. So I didn't know where the genesis of that principal statement came from.
yeah, and I was wondering, we made reference to Shutesbury's representative draft statement of principles regarding the regional assessment method. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
And I was wondering if we had that we could include in here, or at least attach to this.
To you.
Yeah, so Susie shared it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I can send it to you again, George, if you
Yeah, please do. Sorry.
Okay.
Wait, let me look at my folder. I've actually got a folder for this stuff. Let me just take a quick look there. When did you send that email?
That's a trick.
I apologize for missing that one.
Oh Lord. Progress. Nope. Document. Here it is.
Lord, to table.
The 22nd, Monday, the 22nd.
Okay, I got it right here.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you got this from Becky. I do remember this.
Yeah.
So here's what I see in the select board notes.
Mm-hmm.
So it says I always never know how to pronounce his name. Is it DiChiara?
Yeah, DQ.
Yeah, Michael DiChiara.
Yeah. Reads draft statement of principle for regional assessment method FY18 or FY19 into the record, and notes that if this document can be signed in advance of town meeting, it will serve as a values statement.
Yeah.
I guess I assumed maybe I'm wrong, that Michael maybe.
I think that's true.
Kind of took the first cut at that.
This came out of the regional working group, and I think Michael pulled it together with probably Sean, or probably just Michael, and then they shared it with the towns. I'm sorry.
Because then
Amy.
later in the minutes, it says, of that same meeting, it says Torres suggests DiChiara and Arvanitis work with the other towns in the assessment group to craft the draft statement of principle. So I took that to mean that, you know, we sort of like took the first step in crafting the language, and then you and Michael took it to the assessment group to get their feedback.
We may have also taken it directly to Michael, because I know we met with
Okay.
Michael and Sean, the four of us. And we may have taken it directly to Michael and asked him to present this to everyone. Knowing that if we did it, it would get harpooned. I think that's how it went.
I
I'm
see.
sorry,
Got
I'm
it.
vague on it.
That's
The
right.
other person I wanted to run through this timeline with is Becky.
Yes,
But she is like so swamped with the
I'm
going on.
I
sure.
know.
So,
I hate
but
asking
I will
Becky for
send
stuff.
it to her. So I think any
So-
kind of edits we want to put out there, we can.
But Susie, I think you did make a point that is true, and it is not, I don't know if it's reflected in this timeline, which is that later on in that year, there was reference to substantive edits being made to the statement, which Shutesbury did not agree with.
Right.
And then that we did some addition, you're sort of responding to
Mhm.
that. And then there was a final document, which I guess we're seeing
Right.
in the signed version.
Yeah, I was thinking the way it's worded, Shutesbury representatives drafted a statement of principle. Maybe what we should just say is ultimately the four towns signed a statement of principle
Yeah, because
and not get into how it
Who
all
drafted it,
transpired.
right, who agreed, right.
Also in that same section, AJ, the third bullet. I
Yeah.
think the third bullet, it says 50% statutory method for FY18. I think we used the 10% of statutory method for FY18.
Oh, I got that. We used in 18, 10.
We
90,
did.
10 and 90.
Yeah, so.
we did, but it sounded like what happened is at so I think in the whatever it was, November, December, four towns meeting, everybody but Leverett, at least this is how the notes made it seem, was willing to do 15%, and Leverett was sticking to the same 10% that had been used in the prior year. And then at the February meeting, it sounded to me, it was not specific, but that some work was done on the budget and to make Leverett's assessment, even though it was 10%, it was sort of roughly similar to what the 15% had been, at least at the prior meeting. Does any of that sound familiar at all?
Yeah, it
Because
does
there was
sound
this,
familiar.
because there was this language of essentially the same as the 15% in the select board minutes. So I kind of took that to mean that
Okay, that's a good point, AJ. I understand exactly what you're saying. So maybe what we should do is put in a bullet behind that bullet that just says ultimately FY was, because every year we always show what the percentage was, and we didn't document that for FY18. So I'm thinking
Yeah.
a bullet behind it that says ultimately after budget adjustments, the four towns agreed to 10% of statutory for FY18.
I do have the progress, the date. So like FY16 was per pupil enrollment. FY17 was 10 and 90. 18 was 10 and 90. 19 was 20 and 80. I wonder if at the end of each section we could put that so that so that people can see that FY20 was.
Yeah, we can do the reference to it. Yeah, because like I have it right here in my little notes. I have each year and I have the percentages just to remind me.
Right.
And they put it in the package, which I thought was really helpful.
Yeah. So I think in our history timeline, we might want to do that because it shows. I don't think there's another place it's shown, so that would be a good place to show it.
I could even maybe add a third column on the right, and that'll just for each year, it'll put the, what was.
That's a great idea. Yeah. And in fact,
aren't calendar years.
That's a little, I'll make clear that it's FY,
always use the FY.
Yeah.
Well, actually, another adjustment, minor. I had a few minor things in here, actually, not
Yeah.
many, to tell you the truth. But
Mhm.
in the 2018 section, the second bullet, regional district ultimately recommends an assessment method of calculating 20%. That's missing the FY. I would think that
Oh, yeah.
should say ultimately recommends an FY19 assessment method.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, you may be taking care of that,
Right.
AJ,
Yeah.
so it really
But
doesn't matter, but I just wanted
Right.
to.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to figure out how Tuesday unrolls. I'd like to get this information out to everybody before the meeting.
Yeah.
And it is, um, it is this timeline. It is the principal agreement from 2019, and we do we want a small statement that's so that we come into the meeting with saying what we
So,
endorse or
Susie,
whatever?
I've been sort of jotting down
Mhm.
what sound like are some kind of key
Yep.
themes that have come out of this work.
Yep.
If I can sort of
Yep.
talk through them with you,
Yep.
maybe this would be helpful.
Yep.
So I guess key point one is that there's been a lengthy, I mean, we all know this, but lengthy history of negotiating towards a more balanced assessment method that includes an ability to pay factor, and that we have documented evidence that the other towns have been committed to that principle, right? That our assessment method should include an ability to pay factor, right? Regardless of what, like in contradiction of what was shared at the last meeting about going to, the 5-year rolling average of time. Like we've got a history of all 4 towns working on an assessment method that includes an ability to pay component. Okay. That said, though, there's never been an agreement that 100% statutory or 100% modified statutory is the ultimate goal, right? We found no evidence that there's that other towns have ever agreed to that view. I think a third theme is that it's become clear to us that there is a pretty urgent need to move to a long-term agreement, that this process has been sort of harmful to the functioning of the district, and it makes the budgeting process very difficult. I think there's been some clarification about this idea that Shutesbury can't just force statutory by voting down the assessment method at that all town meeting, right? I mean, I think we have a clear understanding right now that there is a process where DESE will intervene in the process, will use statutory in the short term to put us on a 12-1 budget, but that they are going to force us to go back to the negotiating table, and ultimately we have to, right? We have to find a method that all 4 towns agree to. There's no like, we just, it's up to them, and if they don't agree, then it's going to be statutory, right? So so I think there's clarity around that. And I guess somewhere in here, I think another important point is that there is confusion among other towns and even within our town about what the statutory method is and what its components are. And I think, you've done a lot of work to explain that it's comprised of 3 factors. And so that when we talk about the statutory method, that does not mean that the statutory method is only looking at an ability to pay measures, that it has an ability to pay measure component and a enrollment component. And that as we're trying to work on a compromise method. We're trying to get close to a method that balances ability to pay and enrollment.
Yep.
Those are kind of some of the key themes that or takeaways that, at least for me, have kind of come out of this process of working
Yeah.
on this.
Well, and a method, when talking about what's the best method and trying to get to that method that does not harm any specific town year to year, a method where the differences are not so great that a town couldn't support it.
Right.
I think is an important theme.
Yeah.
And going back to not on a dollar basis, but on a philosophical basis.
Yeah.
Have a ground.
Right.
We're trying to ground this.
Right.
Yes.
I could write up those 5 things and I'll send them out to you, and if it looks good, we'll send it to the board. I do believe in giving people information before a meeting. So I'll write up those 5 things. And then do we need, I guess we don't get to, we wouldn't reference Andy's offer of 55-45. We'll let that be.
That's going to come up.
Meeting. It will come up in the meeting, and then we can endorse it because it's meeting these principles. It's moving still in the direction we want. We're still trying to hit a balance. There's going to be a working group, and we are satisfied with this, because I do think some people are going to come to that meeting thinking we did negotiations at that 4-town and we should press our point. And I'm like, nope, I'm not there. I don't think that's where we are.
Yeah.
I don't want to be there. I don't think it works. So I'm ready to turn a direction, and some people may feel that is, I don't know what they're going to, betraying where we said we wanted to be. And it's like, well, I'm informed. This is the information I got leads me in this direction, and that's where I want to be.
And,
Yeah, the only other thing I would add, Susie, I'm wondering if this is productive to introduce into the mix here, but the district has an enormous, unprecedented challenge right now that has nothing to do with the assessment method or even the budget, but about planning this return to school in April. That's school committee has voted for. Sounds like, I haven't looked at the paper yet, but I think DESE's imposing on all districts. I think they voted on this yesterday. So this is not a good time for us to be asking the superintendent to invest an enormous amount of time and energy in helping us to resolve an impasse that we're facing with the other towns right now. There's so much going on right now.
For me, it's the bottom line is the uncertainty of FY22 for all the towns. And Amherst in particular, because they have a commercial base and we don't know how they're going to be impacted. And they're arguing strongly that they're in bad shape. And we got to respect that to some extent. I know people in our town could care less because they're the rich Amherst. Certainly when you're out there in the sports, they see it that way. But we have to respect that. So that uncertainty is the way I look at it. And so going to 55% is a big jump for Amherst, but it gives us a good decrease. It moves us in the right direction. A working group that talks this summer about all of this, and then some of that uncertainty comes into play, is less uncertain at that point in time. And we do believe that we need to do better in 55. I think if we say that, then people are going to support us. Or people are going to say, yeah, okay, good. And we keep that impression that we're still moving forward. We're still analyzing. We're still going to negotiate for better than what we have. And by the way, AJ, you wrote a whole document that shows that. This has been our history. We're not blowing smoke here. This is what we've been doing, and this is what we're going to continue to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, what's clear? Right.
This is all we can do right now. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not saying that we don't disagree with a lot of what we're hearing. We're just saying, let nature take its course. It's moving in the right direction.
Right. Yeah, and it's like, if we could go back in time and tell, George in 2015, that, we're gonna be at a assessment method that's 55% statutory, I think you would have been thrilled based on what I'm reading in these notes. It's where it seemed like it was going to be impossible to kind of move the needle at all, even past this 10%.
I was happy with last year's 45. I thought that was
Yeah.
a win because I was expecting 40. And when I saw 45, I was pretty happy about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just takes time. This is the environment we live in.
The one
People
other
need to
piece
be-
I'd want to keep in this mix is that we want the school committee to pass a budget that sustains Amherst as best as possible. Because I don't think it's a done deal yet, but we don't want to keep moving this ball down the field and have them trash the budget, trash the
Right. Actually, that's very important, Susie, because I think, even if the budget that's going to be voted on in a couple of weeks includes the $1 million cuts, we know that there's some pressure within Amherst to increase those cuts, right? Whether maybe it's not, maybe it doesn't end up in the budget that gets voted on, but if now Shutesbury votes against, an assessment method, a 55% assessment method, at annual town meeting, then I think it seems very likely that Amherst that those representatives on the town council are going to say, well, we have no choice now. We have to make additional cuts because this represents the best we could do.
Right. So we'll call it consistent support for a regional school budget that gives good education or something like that. I'll write it up and you can fix it.
Right,
Yeah.
or it doesn't.
And I think we can also just kind of put to bed this confusion that has come up even as recently, I think, as like our last FinCom meeting about how like this scenario at a town meeting where we can vote to approve the budget and also vote against the assessment, like that. It is very clear to me that is not that is not a scenario, that a vote, and that's why the assessment vote comes before the budget vote, right? It's because if we vote down the assessment method, then there is no budget.
Mike Ginsky has said that we can vote against the assessment and it won't cut the budget. It's like, no, that's not true.
It's not true.
It's not true, and so don't say that. But the
Well,
other
he
thing
says
is,
a lot of stuff.
if we make a 6-point thing and we include the agreement, should we send it to the other towns as well? Are we trying to, because one thing I felt was consistent in the history is it's hard to communicate to all the towns, and I'm not sure everything was sent to people so they really did hear it, but I feel like Shutesbury needs to show its full direction. Not, I have notes from the Leverett. First of all, no other towns meet the way we do. They don't. The FinCons and the other towns are like, whoop, they don't meet, and a lot of it they don't have minutes archived. But the select board in Leverett, has a couple of times referenced the Shutesbury manipulating the regional agreement and holding hostage and blah, blah, blah. So I would like to have a statement that's more like what we are doing, not what we're, not being trashers of situations.
Well, we got to be careful with what we present and who we present it to, because we don't want to look like we're trying to end run boards in other towns to get their citizens to see our position. That's not going to be helpful. So we need to really work directly. That's what the 4-town meeting is for us to articulate our position with the other towns. And I think what we're doing with the education, just to finish, Desi coming in and having this conversation with the 4 towns is another forum for us and an opportunity for us to hit those those people on, what is it, the finance, it's not the finance committee, it's the financial board in Amherst. This is an opportunity to address and answer the questions that they've been raising. So I'm just cautioning you that we just have to be, we do have to be careful. Like you said, Julie Shively, she's the one who's writing notes like that in the select board
Oh,
notes
Kip
for the
Farn.
town of Leverett.
Yeah.
Shutesbury's manipulating. I can hear her saying it.
Actually, that was Kip Farn.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's more widespread out there because our only appearance is at 4 towns where people went in with a sense of what negotiating was, but negotiating didn't include understanding or reflecting our understanding of the whole picture. And that's what I feel I would like to do, but that's okay.
But towns are going to view that as us just, espousing a position and trying to manipulate's a strong word, but that's obviously the word that Leverett's willing to use. And there's the press too. When Scott Merzbach starts coming around and asking us questions, we need to have responses ready for him.
Mhm.
Certainly, we've had opportunity to get statements out there, and we have always showing that we want to support the region and we don't want to crash the region with 100%. But the point about ability to pay, it's a hard. I don't know what the real answers are. I do think that what we're about to do, if Desi does come in and we get everybody to show up, I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to bring a lot of people up to speed.
We'll save it for that. All right. So I think we are done.
Well, the only thing we haven't done is we haven't finished talking about AJ's document, Susie.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a lot of changes.
Well, I think there's a couple things we could do here. Is one, if George, if you have notes that you want to send to me after our meeting today, I can make changes. And I guess I don't know if Becky would have time to review this before Tuesday, but if it were possible to get feedback, by Monday, or even, by Tuesday
I can
morning.
give you feedback now, AJ. I'm done with it. I mean,
Okay.
all I need to do is I'm looking for your email. I'm going to reply to it. I only had one other thing.
Okay.
No, I'm replying. Let me reply all in the I think it's the last section. I felt like, let me just send this and then I'll tell you what. In 2019 section, I added a whole book. The first bullet in what I just sent you is all mine. I added it on top of what was once your first bullet.
Okay.
And the only point was there was a regional working group before we brought to the towns FY20. And this was pretty significant what we did. So I wrote a paragraph to address what we did.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to put it right in.
Yeah, I mean, you both might want to look at it real quick before we hang up and just if you have any questions. But basically, I'm saying there was that regional, and that wasn't mentioned that there was another
Oh,
one.
yeah. No, I'm glad because it didn't come up in the
Right.
select board meetings, but minutes, but I've obviously heard you talk about this.
Yeah.
Several times. So I'm glad it's in here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think you'll like it. I think it's good. And the only other thing is, in all these documents, we rarely mention anybody's name, but in the last section, we mentioned Jeff Lacey.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we want to mention a person's name.
I did want to ask you guys about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can definitely, I think what you said needs to be said.
Yeah.
I just don't want to have.
Was urged. You just say the town was urged.
Yeah.
You don't have to say who.
Some town
How
residents.
about town residents urge the select board
Yeah.
to reduce Shutesbury's region? Yeah.
Yeah, some town residents, yes.
Yeah.
Because it was Jeff, but there was others.
Mhm.
Okay. And then in the next sentence, I'll say,
A letter was distributed.
yeah, a letter was distributed urging
Mhm.
citizens to vote against. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I wondered about it too as I was writing it. And
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought it up because I did want to ask you about that.
No, AJ, this was really good. I didn't find a whole lot else.
Yeah. And
A letter was,
I think it helps for each of us to go through a process of looking and thinking. And then now I feel like I can go back to the FinCom and not be sort of bullied around by general ideas. I have a more specific base to work from. So I'm going to send the 6 points we decided, and I think I will send these are to the FinCom members, and I will send out the agreement of principles, because I don't think people knew that there was one.
Yeah.
And then when I get the timeline from AJ edited, that will be in the packet.
Yeah.
And
So I think what I'll do is I will label the timeline as a draft,
Mhm.
and, sort of, because, between Bob and I mean, there are people on our committee that have a lot of this history. And so it'll sort of give other folks an opportunity to amend this, or make suggestions if
Mhm.
they're appropriate.
Well, my initial goal of this was to get some of the discussion out of our meetings, because we have a ton of shit to do. And
Yeah.
so I want to try to minimize
Yes,
this piece.
that's right.
And that's why I'm trying to get the information there and then say, as a result of our study, this is what we would recommend to the FinCom to think. Or to
Right. And I think what just saved us a whole lot of time was if everybody can get on board with 55% in a working group for the summer, then I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time
Right.
in the weeds.
Okay, good. Okay, how does that sound?
That sounds good.
Yep, I'm in.
11 o'clock. Here it goes again.
No, this was productive. This was good.
Good. All
Yeah,
right.
I mean,
Well,
Susie, I want to thank you for all your archival work here. I mean, it was really
Yeah.
it was like really interesting process to kind of having not been involved. I really feel way more informed
Yeah.
than I was
Yeah.
a month ago. So thank you for pulling all this together.
you're
And-
welcome.
And what an amount of effort. I just
Yeah.
can't believe how much time you spent on this.
Yeah.
I
Well,
was a little concerned about being on this committee because it looked like there was going to be a lot of work, but you did it all.
Yeah.
no. And I understand things because we're all working on this. So
Yeah.
that's why I'm a little sad that we didn't have somebody like Bob join us, because I believe information really does matter. And it really does put everybody on the same thing. But
Right.
hey, I have those documents. He can read them all the way through if he'd like. But
Yeah.
we summed it up for him. So
Well, I would say one thing, and that is the three of us being on the subgroup, it doesn't necessarily have that broad balance of opinions. And so I do think we have to be conscious of the fact that, people would say, well, look who it was. Of course, that's what they came up with. So
Yeah.
you do have to be careful about that.
right.
Yeah,
Well,
I
and look
think
who does the work. That's what I'm a little tired of that part.
Yeah.
If you do the work, you get to have the credibility. Okay.
And we certainly have the position and the arguments, we're prepared.
And everybody, and that information's available to everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.
Right.
Tuesday on TV.
Okay. See you
All right.
all.
Yep.
Take care.
Bye.
Enjoy your weekend. Okay.
You too.